The Honda Brio is a bit of a familiar model for us, first introduced in the early 2010s, and this second generation model landed in the country in 2019. Now in 2023, however, Honda has given a few improvements to its tiniest hatchback, but the question is this: just how improved is it exactly? And that is why we've been driving this fella around for quite some time already to tell you all about it. But really, anything this small is going to be great around town or in the city. I mean, that's what these cars are for. But what's it like when you take it out on the highway? Well, we also drove it along Calax, and surprisingly, it actually does well. Well, that 1.2-liter engine definitely helps, and it also helps that it's the most powerful in class. It's got about 90 horsepower and give or take 120 newton meters of torque. So you're really not going to be short on power at all. Of course, overtaking does require some planning, but it's not dangerously slow. That's how I would put it. So for those wondering if you can actually take this car on a road trip, you can, and it's not gonna feel vulnerable on the expressway or any of that. It doesn't wander around the highway, and considering its size, it actually doesn't get bothered too much by crosswinds. That's a pretty remarkable thing, especially when you look at the dimensions of this car. It's not even 4 meters long. Some people here like the fact that it has 4 cylinders because, I don't know, I guess it's just an even number. And for some people, the idea of a 3-cylinder just doesn't sit well with them. For them, that's not a proper car engine, although we have to accept the fact that, engine downsizing really is a thing these days. But, for those who still prefer a 4-cylinder, the Brio is the way to go. In terms of refinement, it's fairly quiet. Although, this being an A-segment car, a mini hatchback, you're not going to expect like Honda Accord or Honda CR-V levels of quietness in here. But again, if we're going to benchmark here and look at the other competitors, it is relatively quiet. As for fuel economy, we are sitting in traffic right now, and so far this has done a mixed fuel consumption of 12 kilometers per liter. So a bit of highway driving and a lot of time sitting in traffic. Even in the worst of traffic, you're still gonna do probably about 9 kilometers per liter. And on like your usual traffic day or a little past rush hour, a little before rush hour, it'll easily do 10 kilometers per liter, maybe even more. Now out on the highway though, you're gonna easily get 18 kilometers per liter. And truth be told, I wasn't even being careful that time when I was driving on the highway. 18 kilometers per liter, no hypermiling needed. You don't have to be like extra ginger on the throttle or any of that. So those are a couple of the driving impressions, but what exactly is new in terms of feel? Truth be told, it is almost the same as the pre-facelift model. It's still light and then it weights up again on the highway or at higher speeds, and it's a formula that works for Honda and it's a formula that works for the Brios. This particular variant is 883,000 pesos, so it's pretty pricey when you look at it on paper, but when you look at the competitors, they're almost around the same either way. Okay, so it doesn't exactly feel like an all-new car, or it doesn't feel like they made any upgrades to the suspension or the steering system or whatnot. So what exactly is new? Well, for some drivers, they will appreciate the fact that it has reverse sensors now. And just to be very sure that you actually don't hit anything when you're backing up, a reverse camera is standard as well. And the same goes even with the V variant, the one below this one. On to handling. It's kind of difficult to judge when you're stuck in traffic, but I did mention the light steering, and it's pretty agreeable. You're not going to feel tired driving it, and grips well, turns well, all of the usual city car stuff. But I think the thing that really helps the Brio though are the relatively wide tires for this sort of car. If I'm not mistaken, they're either 185 or 195s. In a car like this, 195 section tires are pretty meaty, and it's also reflected with the way it turns when you're on the highway. And if you still don't believe me when it comes to its handling, my friend Leander actually just took one of these on a track day, and they had fun with this car. You know, it's a zippy little car. It's not fast in the straights or etc. But you know, around the bends, because of the short wheelbase and the small dimensions, it made it extra maneuverable and extra responsive when it comes to the corners. And that's just something big cars can never do. Yes, it's not a track car, but I think Honda's trying to prove the point that you can have fun with this car. Now that we've driven the Brio around for a bit, I'm going to tell you a bit more about the interior, because this is where you're going to spend most of your time anyway. When it comes to design, well, it's exactly the same as the pre-facelift model. It's got the same door panels, it's got the same design dashboard, it's got the same instrument cluster even the controls down here, they're exactly the same as before. However, the 2023 model does bring in new seat patterns, and that's pretty much it. There are things, however, that I wish this one had. Now, one, okay, it's relatively minor, would be a footrest. The footrest basically is the wheel well right at the front. Another would be an armrest. Now, this is the top of the line RS, and it still doesn't have one. However, one of my biggest bugbears here is the instrument cluster. See, in Indonesia, it comes with a digital multi-information display. Unfortunately, the Philippine model doesn't get that. It's a purely analog arrangement, and it's the same as before. Now, moving on to the infotainment system, it is an upgraded unit, and it is by Kenwood, and it now features Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Now, yes, even budget hatchbacks these days come with such features, and you don't even have to order the RS to get it, because even the V comes with those smartphone mirroring apps. However, I do have a beef with how you connect it. Now, yes, you just plug it in, no big deal, but it's the way that, this whole setup is arranged, because normally you just plug it in by the screen, but when you look at the screen, there's no USB port or any of that. Instead, you get this cord down here. But that aside, I have no complaints about the interior ergonomics. Now, the buttons are exactly where you want them to be. You got your volume control here, your light switches, etc. Design, I got no complaints, but some people will call it a little too familiar. But nonetheless, it's an easy to use, easy to interact with cabin. By the way, there's no seat height adjuster in this car, although I'm gonna give it a pass this time because it is a small car and I don't really need to look up high to see the road ahead of me. So that's the front covered. Let's hop on to the back seats. Well, truth be told, I don't have much to report here at the back because you don't really get much features back here. You don't even get a rear armrest, although that's sort of par for the course in this segment. You do get an extra seat pocket here at the back. Of course, hard materials, that's sort of, again, par for the course in this segment. But, let's talk more about the room and the back seats themselves. I make the car look spacious because I'm not that tall, but say you have someone who's close to 6 feet and you have someone my height at the back, it's still going to be a decent amount of room. Headroom is about this much, and one thing I did notice about the seats is that they're raised. The seats aren't mounted low, so your legs don't end up going up high here, and that's gonna give you a bit of a cramp or a bit of a leg ache. Other things about the back, well, this actually doesn't fold totally flat, these backrests, and it's not a 60-40 split. This whole piece right here, it just folds down as one. So that's something to take note of if you're carrying cargo over at the back, if you want to extend the cargo area. And speaking of which, you want to check it out? Well, you don't have much of a choice. You're coming with me in the camera. Now, if you've noticed, we actually haven't taken anything out of the trunk. And that's because we sort of want to highlight just how spacious it is over in the cargo area. Now, obviously, it's not going to be a Chevy Suburban in terms of carrying capacity. Heck, I think this thing probably fits at the back of a Chevy Suburban. But what we have packing here actually is this soft bag, this backpack. You got a hard case here, and there's actually another pair of hard cases down here at the bottom. And we even brought a camping chair for good measure, and it fills up the trunk quite nicely. And you can stretch that further by folding this one-piece backrest. The disadvantage, however, is that you don't have the same cargo area flexibility as you'd get in other hatchbacks or other bigger hatchbacks. Although, again, most of its competitors have a one-piece backrest. However, what some of its competitors do have is a totally flat cargo area floor. Now, in the Brio, it sort of just juts out like that, so that's where the backrest sort of pivots, and that does eat up cargo space. But nonetheless, you're looking at about 258 liters of space with these back seats in place, and close to about 800 liters when you fold the seats down. Now, to put that into perspective, that's actually bigger than most of its competitors. Although Toyota still won't mention the exact cargo capacity of the Wigo, we're not entirely sure if that's bigger already, but nonetheless, you're not going to have much problems the back of the Brio. Now, as far as exterior revamps go, the one on the Brio is rather minor. Now, it's a familiar shape to just about everyone, and at first glance, you might even mistake it for the pre-facelift model. However, there are a couple of key differences. Like at the front, you get extra LEDs right up at the top of the headlights, and you also get that much bigger grille, just to give it more road presence. Like, I know it's a tiny car, but that little bit of extra presence does help, especially if a bunch of SUVs are trying to bully you. Another new thing about it is the entire mold of the front bumper. It's a little more chiseled, a little more aggressive, and more angular than before, and I would say it actually suits the Brio rather well. And it has the same bumper whether it is the RS or the entry-level V or S variants. Now, you also probably noticed the color. Now, Honda calls this Stellar Diamond, and this particular shade is exclusive to the RS. Although there is another color called Electric Lime, and that's available in all variants. Now, this color sort of gives the RS a more mature vibe, so to speak. And yes, it looks cute and etc., but I do rather like this shade of white. Although if you go for the Electric Lime, that sort of brings out the youthful and sort of more joyful bit of the Brio's design. Now, other things. The RS wheels, yes, they're the same pattern. However, they're a slightly darker shade this time around, and over at the taillights, it's got a smoked effect. The rear diffuser has slightly been changed as well for this model year. All in all though, the design is very familiar, and that's not a bad thing at all because, well, the Brio for a subcompact hatchback is a bit of a looker, and the RS sort of just elevates that even more. And if you want a little more distinction, well, it's even available with a black roof option, so you have to pay a little bit more to get that black roof. So have the improvements gone far enough? Well, in terms of drivability, it's still about the same, and so is the interior feel and so on and so forth. But thankfully, there are added features such as reverse sensors and a reverse camera, and also the windows are now automatic or one-touch windows. Minor improvements, but they do a lot to sort of elevate the car. So with that, let's run by the car's pros and cons. Now, pros definitely is the fuel efficiency. Now, this thing can easily do over 10 kilometers per liter all day, every day, even in bad traffic. In really, really, really bad traffic, you're still going to look at about 8 to 9 kilometers per liter in this thing. And then there's the performance. Now, I know that it doesn't even make 100 horsepower, but the body is light, the transmission's responsive enough, the engine's punchy enough, and it's actually the most powerful in class. So that's something worth noting if you want that little bit of zing when you're coming off the line. The third would be space efficiency. Now, it doesn't have the same space as like a CR-V or a Civic or any bigger car, but for its size and for what it is, it's actually pretty good in there. And lastly would be the handling. Now, Honda actually took these cars out for a mini track day a couple of weeks back, and I can confidently report to you that a bunch of motoring journalists enjoyed driving this around the racetrack. And it's not even a Type R. They just had fun flinging this car around because it's so small. Now for the cons, well, it is a small car, but the fuel tank isn't exactly the biggest either. Now, I know a lot of its competitors don't even have 40-liter tanks, but you know, a slightly bigger tank would have been appreciated just so you could extend the range and make the most out of this engine's efficiency. The second would be some minor interior annoyances, like the lack of a footrest and the lack of an armrest. But the third one would be the instrument cluster. Really, it just sort of just dates that car a little bit more. And given that most of its competitors are coming with at least a multi-information display on the dashboard, I don't know, that cluster just brings it back from like a decade or two ago. The Indonesian spec model with the multi-information display would be greatly appreciated. But lastly, and it's really not the fault of the car, is its age. Now, it's not exactly young. I mean, it came out in 2019 and it's now 2023. So normally Honda would redesign a model every 5 or 6 years, but this is creeping up on its fifth year already. And by next year, it's going to be on its sixth year. And it just got a refresh. So we're giving it probably 2 or 3 more years before Honda actually gives this car a full model change. So those cons aside, what do we think of the Brio? Okay, the improvements are there, they're greatly appreciated. Could do a little bit more with the interior, but nonetheless a solid car, especially for those looking for their first set of wheels or they just want to downsize their car. It's really a car you shouldn't miss out on your shortlist when you're shopping for a car of this segment. And with that, we're gonna give it a score of 8 out of 10. However, the Brio has a big challenge ahead of it, and that's in the form of the all-new Toyota Wigo.